February 2024. Consequently, the bill was referred to the National Assembly for concurrence as per Article 110(4) of the Constitution and Standing Order 161 of the Senate Standing Orders. The Equalization Fund, Madam Speaker, is established under Article 2041 of the Constitution, which requires that 0.5% or 0.5% of all the revenue collected by national government each year be paid into the fund. The amount is calculated on the basis of the most recent audited accounts of revenue received and as approved by the National Assembly. Madam Speaker, Article 2042 of the Constitution provides that the national government shall use the Equalization Fund only to provide basic services, including water, roads, health, electricity, uses it to facilitate marginalized areas to the extent necessary to bring the quality of those services in those areas to the level generally enjoyed by the rest of the country. Madam Speaker, allocations from the fund to the marginalized areas are undertaken in line with a predetermined policy developed by the Commission of Revenue Allocation, the CRA Commission, as mandated in Article 2164 of the Constitution. Currently, the second policy, which identifies 1,424 marginalized areas across 34 counties, is under implementation. Each marginalized area is allocated a share of the Equalization Fund based on allocation factor and as determined by CRA. Madam Speaker, the Equalization Fund Appropriation Bill for the financial year 23-24 proposes to appropriate a total of 10.87 billion. Out of this 10.87 billion, 8.57 are allocations for the financial year 22-23, and 2.5 is arrears. Sorry, for the financial year 23-24, and 2.5 are arrears. Out of this amount, 10.54 billion is to be shared among marginalized areas in the 34 counties for development expenditure. But there is an allocation of 326 million for recurrent expenses, for recurrent expenses of the board, which is in line with Regulation 10.3 of the Public Finance Management, Equalization Fund Administration Regulations 2021. The 326 million is to be used by the Equalization Fund Advisory Board, recurrent expenditure. The law provides that the board expenses shall not be more than 3% of the annual approved equalization fund. And therefore, the 326 is the 3% of the total proposed 10.87 billion. Madam Speaker, the bill outlines the conditions for the usage and operation of the fund in the Equalization Fund Appropriations Bill number 2, Bill for financial year 2023-2024. The conditions include the following. 1, exclusion of funds from being paid into the county revenue fund. This condition is anchored in the provisions of Article 2071 of the Constitution and Section 1092C of the Public Finance Management Act 2012. In conformity to this condition, the bill provides that each beneficiary county to the funds are to be transferred. Each beneficiary county, which funds are to be transferred, shall open an account with the Central Bank of Kenya, and such funds shall be utilized for the development expenditure and shall stay in that account until those projects are completed. 2, the approval granted shall not lapse until the projects identified in each of the counties specified in the first column of the bill are completed. Amendments of the bill by the Senate. The import of the amendments by the Senate One is basically to safeguard the monies in the fund from lapsing until the identified projects are completed. The other one is that it simply captures the expenditure, the 326 million expenditure of the board, which had been omitted in the published bill. And the other one is basically to differentiate. It's meant to differentiate the act from the Equalization Fund Appropriation Bill Act 2023 for financial year 2021-22 and 2022-2023, which was enacted in June 2023. Basically, that is the import of the amendments. What our committee did make observations. In considering the Equalization Fund Appropriations Bill as amended by the Senate, the Budget and Appropriations Committee made the following observations. Honorable Speaker, the first observation is that while the bill intends to appropriate a total of Kenya shillings 10.87 billion to the fund, the money available in the approved supplementary estimates 2023-2024 is Kenya shillings 10.077 billion. This translates to a shortfall of Kenya shillings 790 billion. A budgetary reduction that was undertaken due to a significant delay in the passage of the bill into law. Owing to resource constraints on account of revenue underperformance, the committee noted that it would be a challenge to reinstate this amount into the budget. Secondly, Honorable Speaker, there is no allocation in the supplementary 2 budget of the Kenya shillings 10.33 billion appropriated by the Equalization Fund Appropriation Act 2023. That is the allocation for financial year 2021-2022 and financial year 2022-2023, even though the act is already in place. This is despite a commitment from National Treasury after the allocation was revised to 0 in supplementary 2 of the financial year 22-23 to allocate this amount in the supplementary budget for the financial year 2023-2024. Third, the committee also observed that the total allocation to the fund approved by Parliament since inception is Kenya shillings 22.7 billion, against a total entitlement to the fund of 62.4 billion. Thus, there are arrears amounting to 39.7 billion. The committee, the Budget and Appropriations Committee, urges the National Treasury to adhere to its plan presented to Parliament, which indicated that arrears will be cleared in 4 financial years, beginning financial year 2024-2025, with an allocation of Kenya shillings 9.98 billion in each financial year. Notably, in financial year 24-25, the National Treasury has allocated Kenya shillings 3.5 billion as arrears to the fund, and not the Kenya shillings 9.98 billion as earlier committed. Finally, on observations, the committee noted that the Equalization Fund Appropriations Act 2023 and the allocation in the Equalization Fund Appropriations Bill 2023 for financial year 23-24 will be utilized to implement the second marginalization policy. However, the second policy lapsed in June 2021, and the third policy is yet to be implemented. Committee recommendations. The committee, considering the above matters, the committee recommends the following. Non-financial recommendations. That by 30th September 2024, the National Treasury submits to Parliament a revised plan for clearance of arrears to the Equalization Fund. And 2, that within 6 months upon adoption of this report, the Commission on Revenue Allocation consultation with relevant stakeholders submits the third marginalization policy recommendations to Parliament pursuant to Article 216(5) of the Constitution. Finally, Madam Speaker, we had financial recommendations. The committee recommended that, having examined the Equalization Fund Appropriation number 2, Bill 2023, vis-a-vis the current fiscal framework, the committee recommends that this House approves the bill with amendments as proposed in the attached schedule. Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I beg to move. And I therefore request Honorable Dr. Makali Mulu to second. Thank you.
Makali Mulu.
Thank you very much, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I want to start by thanking the Vice Chair of our committee for that effective moving of this bill. And I stand to second. As I second, Honorable Speaker, I want to make the following observations. Honorable Speaker, Equalization Fund was a very good idea. That's why it's part of our constitution. And the idea was to ensure that those areas which had been marginalized by earlier development programs and policies catch up with the rest of the country. And that's why the allocation of 0.5% of the outage revenue is supposed to go to Equalization Fund. Looking at the Constitution, Honorable Speaker, this fund is supposed to be running for 20 years, since 2010. But you realize that over time, Honorable Speaker, this fund has faced a number of challenges. And these challenges have actually meant the fund not to be very effective in terms of achieving the intended objective. One of the challenges is the issue of delayed funding, Honorable Speaker. Just as Honorable Emasi has said, looking at what should have been allocated as at now and what has been allocated, you realize that we have we have a high number in terms of years where we have not allocated as per the Constitution, Honorable Speaker. And that's why the balance of that 9.7 billion, which has not been allocated, is actually a disservice to these marginalized areas. So, Honorable Speaker, it is important that this House, as we debate this bill, takes the matter of releasing the areas and budgeting for the areas seriously. The second issue, Honorable Speaker, is initially 14 counties had been identified to benefit from this fund. But over time, the counties have now moved to 34. And what that has done, Honorable Speaker, is now the money is being spread thinly to many counties. And as a result of that, then, you also have what I will call micro projects, which might not have as huge impact as it would be if we had the 14 counties. So even as we spread these resources thinly, Honorable Speaker, it is important we think about the impact. Because if you look, initially it was supposed to cater for infrastructure, electricity, health issues, and in a situation where you start now addressing the small dispensaries all over the country, it might not have as much impact as it should be having. The other thing which is important, Honorable Speaker, is the implementation challenges. This fund has faced serious implementation challenges. And through the board, we thought by having a board, things would move smoothly. But over time, Honorable Speaker, we are realizing that this issue of the board is also a major hindrance to the implementation. And I think really we need to streamline this process, the implementation process. Otherwise, Honorable Speaker, we might have no choice as a House, but then to extend the allowed period of 20 years so that it goes beyond 20 years. Because like now we have done over 10 years, nothing is moving on the ground, and if anything is moving, it's very little. So imagine whether we'll be able to capture all these resources in the next 10 years. So I think matters implementation should be taken up seriously by this House, and that's why I want to support the recommendation where we are saying, as we approve this bill, that within 30 days, we need to come up with a very clear framework in terms of how things are going to be done, in terms of realizing the areas, and also implementation, Honorable Speaker. Because that is very, very important, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, if you look at what's up, the issue of the 790 million, which the senators are proposing, that was caused because, Honorable Speaker, even though the law requires that once we allocate the money, we should not touch the money. But Treasury has come up with a practice whereby every year, if they want to get money from anywhere to sort another problem in the country, they always go to the Equalization Fund, reduce the resources, and claim that in the next financial year, they will be able to replenish the balances. And I think this is a serious matter, Honorable Speaker. So we need to make sure that as a House, we strictly adhere to the financial requirement that once the money is allocated or appropriated for Equalization Fund, those resources remain there, and we make sure that we push Treasury so that the resources are released. And as a result of that, Honorable Chair, then we will be able, Honorable Chair, to realize the intended objectives of this fund, Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, as a committee, we had said this year we'll provide about 3.5 billion, which is part of the arrears, which was actually coming to around 11 billion. Now you can see the figures also come down a bit to 10.87. And I think these small changes are the changes which are affecting this fund. So my plea to this House is, honorable members, we support this bill so that we pave the way for utilization of these resources. And by doing that, we'll be helping other parts of this country which were marginalized. And Honorable Speaker, if you look at the origin of this marginalization, where it started, Honorable Speaker, you realize that the seasonal paper number 1 of 1965 was more focused on this country using our resources to develop the high potential areas, which means we left behind the ASO areas and other areas which are marginalized. So it is very important that with that background, Honorable Speaker, that this House facilitates utilization of these resources in the areas which are marginalized, and as a result of that, we will be able then to move the country to the rest of the country, to catch up with the rest of the country in terms of development. So with those many remarks, Honorable Speaker, I second and urge the House, we support this bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I therefore propose that the Equalization Fund Appropriation number 2, Bill number 2, Senate Bill number 30 of 2023 be read a second time. I can see there is quite some interest on this. I will give the member for Mwingi West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for giving me this opportunity actually to add the voice on this matter, which is actually motto in this country, Madam Speaker. And the first thing, I would like to thank the committee for the work they have done, and the Senate, of course, where it has originated, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I recall the CEO, Guyo, met our committee on this matter. And some of the challenges, actually, he told us, it touches on many aspects. And this fund was established constitutionally in 2010 to address the disparities among the counties in terms of development in issues to deal with water, electricity, health care, and roads, Madam Speaker. And you have heard there are challenges facing this implementation, challenges of the Treasury delaying the releasing of the funds has been the main issue. We are talking in less than actually 6 years, we have got a deficit of 40 billion, which has not been remitted to these counties, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we need to address this issue and also inform the Treasury that this fund is a constitutional fund and implementation must be taken to avoid lacuna state of our constitution, Madam Speaker. The other issue, of course, in terms of implementation, we need to challenge the Commission on Revenue Allocation to come up with a proper policy, Madam Speaker, of addressing the policy of marginalization policy. If you look at this list, the counties which are benefiting, some of them have got similar characteristics like mine in Mwingi West. And most of these counties, my place, I'm not even getting Equalization Fund. We need to come up with another criteria of selecting the areas that are already marginalized. And without even arguing, Mwingi West is one of the most marginalized area in this country. There is no explanation you can tell me Garissa, Tana River, and most of the constituencies surrounding me are getting equalization fund. And when it comes to Mwinkwe, we are not there, Madam Speaker. We are being told we are developed. Majority of the population in my constituency is still lacking access to good roads, access to clean water, access to electricity, access to other health facilities, Madam Speaker. So we need to come up with a clear policy of adding more areas that have already been marginalized, Madam Speaker. And with those few remarks, I support, but still we need to press very hard for Treasury to make sure the areas that have already been incurred in this fund are fully remitted to benefit the Kenyans without necessarily delaying them. With those few remarks, I support, Madam Speaker.
Honorable Michael Mushira.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I start to support the Equalization Fund Appropriation Bill as laid by the Vice Chair Budget. Madam Chair, this fund, as everybody knows, is important towards taking care of the marginalized counties. But Mr. Speaker, as I am supporting, Madam Speaker, as I am supporting, I'd wish to really this House to consider the effectiveness of this fund, because, Mr. Speaker, this fund was meant to bring the marginalized counties at par with other counties in the country. But looking at it critically, Madam Speaker, as the report has stated, we started with 14 counties, and one would have expected that with time, as we bring these counties at par with other counties, the counties would reduce below 14. But, Madam Speaker, as you can see, the counties that are marginalized continue increasing. And that means that probably this fund is not being used effectively. Madam Speaker, we've seen some of the counties advertising projects that are not of any significant importance or that are not likely to create any impact to those counties. When you use this fund to do a road of 5 million, to do things that are not sustainable, Madam Speaker, we would wonder whether these marginalized counties will ever become removed from that bracket of marginalization. Speaker, but having said so, now that the CRA is doing the third marginalization policy, I would ask the Commission to really do a proper study so that the counties, we would want to know the counties, the 14 counties that were being considered since 2010, how far have they come out of the marginalization? And we also now speaking for Nyandarua, Madam Speaker, you find that in Nyandarua, we have an area called Daragwa. Daragwa is really marginalized. And Madam Speaker, I've always wondered why CRA has never thought of considering Daragwa, which is dry, completely dry. People are given food there. A very marginalized constituency in Nyandarua. And therefore, I would wish CRA, to consider Nyandarua as a marginalized area in the third marginalization policy, and specifically, not even my constituency, Mr. Speaker, but Daragwa constituency. With those few remarks, I support.
Kiona Bonaisula Lesuda.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also join my colleagues and rise to support the Equalization Appropriations Bill as tabled by the Vice Chair, Honorable Emase, of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. Madam Speaker, I just want to point out a number of issues regarding the Equalization Fund. And we all know as a country that there was a conversation in 2010 when we were coming up with our constitution, and it was agreed that there are some areas in our country which have been left behind in terms of development since we got independence, Madam Speaker. And this is something that was canvassed across the country, and it was agreed, and the Equalization Fund was captured in the Constitution. Madam Speaker, it is unfortunate that since the realization of the Equalization Fund, this is just the second time that funds have been released to the counties that are supposed to benefit from the Equalization Fund, Madam Speaker. And we have had a lot of pull and push in this House, pushing for the release of this money, Madam Speaker. And I'm happy that recently 10 billion was released to the 14 counties. It is unfortunate that when we still have a balance of 39.7 billion counties, Madam Speaker, CRA opened another Pandora's box of going against the 14 counties. Now we are at 34 counties. We are going to the third generation formula, Madam Speaker. I don't know how many counties again. You know, there was a reason, a well-thought process why we had the 14 counties, Madam Speaker. You know, when I listen to my colleagues talking about pockets of underdevelopment in their counties, Madam Speaker, while some of us talk about underdevelopment in an entire county, Madam Speaker. For example, in Samburu County, we were able to get tarmac just a few years ago, 2 that get to Maralal Town, our headquarters, Madam Speaker. While some people are talking about tarmac roads connecting to villages, Madam Speaker. And so it is important for us as a country to appreciate the role that Equalization Fund plays and why these counties were thought through when we were doing our constitution, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to talk about the Equalization Fund, the monies once they are released to the counties. The challenge that we see is that once the committee or the people who sit at the county level, Madam Speaker, to come up with the projects that should be funded by the Equalization Fund, we find it that we are looking at very minute, small projects, Madam Speaker. A road of 8 million, a road of 10 million, a road of 11 million, Madam Speaker. Those are functions that the county governments can do. The whole important, or the reason why the country thought about Equalization Fund was to do mega projects that actually uplift the lives of those people in those counties. And so if it's a major dam, if it's a major water supply issue, if it is a road that is connecting a sub-county and a sub-county, or even inter-county, Madam Speaker. Otherwise, the lapse of this Equalization Fund will get here. And when you look at our counties, we are still at the same place. And so I will also urge the governors and even us members of parliament, because we have representatives in that board, Madam Speaker, that we should look at the bigger picture. It will not sail again. It will not fly. In another 10 years, 20 years, we are still talking about marginalization in our counties, Madam Speaker. Kenyans will say, you've had your time. You've had the fund. What exactly can people see that this fund has done in our counties, Madam Speaker? And so I would urge the governors, because they are the ones who are actually controlling most of this money now. And one other thing, the things that are agreed by the board, Madam Speaker, that these are our priority areas. The governors should stop going again to sit with their own finance people and sitting with a few people and rearranging what the people on the ground have prioritized to be done through Equalization Fund, Madam Speaker. And so I want that our governors can look at the bigger picture and see to it that this Equalization Fund, Madam Speaker, will deal on very critical issues for us. Finally, and that is what I want to conclude with, Madam Speaker. This whole issue of us as a country, when we see something working for other people, we say that even us, we want from the same place, or we want from that place. There is a reason, and I keep telling some of my colleagues, please come and be a member of parliament of Samburu and stay one day there. They will not even survive.
first from the heat, from the no roads, no water. They will not survive there. And so let the people who benefit from the Equalization Fund benefit until when we are at a certain level of development. You can fight for your
Honorable
own fund.
Naisula, hold on. Honorable Kwenya, what is out of order?
Madam Speaker, the gracious member should be seated when I'm on point of order so that I can address the Speaker effectively. Mr. Speaker, you see, the member for Samburu is insinuating that we do not have the capacity to represent people anywhere in this country. I don't know from what premise she's speaking from, because she doesn't have the measure, so to say, to know what we go through as members of parliament. I come from a very cold area, and I believe that any member who is in this house can represent members of Kinangop.
Honorable Kwenya, when your time comes, you can also refer to the same, that they cannot survive in the cold of Kinangop. It's a point of debate. Honorable Naisula, continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And so I just wanted to say that even as we raise our issues and of the different counties and constituencies that we come from, Madam Speaker, we should do it appreciating the diversity of our country, the different challenges that we face in different parts of the country, Madam Speaker, but not fight or look like we are talking against each other, like demeaning. There is a certain narrative that has been going across this country, Madam Speaker, that all the funds that go to the northeastern region is just being embezzled. It's the one building Nairobi County, Madam Speaker. I don't think corruption is reserved to a certain part of this country, Madam Speaker. Corruption cuts across from the national government to all parts of this country. And so when you talk about issues of your region, please leave the counties that benefit from Equalization Fund to benefit, because there was a reason why the drafters of the Constitution and Kenyans put the Equalization Fund there. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Honorable Jackson Kosgei.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. While I support this bill, Madam Speaker, I think it is about time we as a country revisit this term, marginalization, with a view of trying to find out if Equalization Fund was given for 20 years, the question that follows is what happens after that? And what is it that is being done that within 20 years it will have solved the issue of marginalization? As I scanned through the bill from the Senate, I was looking for one thing. What is the lasting solution? What is the long-term solution? For instance, Madam Speaker, we need to devote a sizable resources to exploiting the potential that these areas do have. According to the Natural Resource Development Society, or Council for that matter, which is an international body, seems to be indicating that most of the areas we refer to as marginalized areas do have immense natural resources underneath. Do we think as a country that by exploiting these natural resources within the period given to the marginalized areas, we should have been able to develop a program that will exploit those natural resources and that will complement in the economy of the country? With that, Madam Speaker, I think we need to also divine the nature and areas of marginalization so that we can avoid a moving target in terms of divining the target and the purpose of this fund. These will become predictable and it will become manageable in terms of divining the call. With that, Madam Speaker, I support the bill. Thank you.
Member for Tinderet.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to support this report from the Senate. The drafters of the Constitution looked at the problems, looked at our country with very objective mind. Madam Speaker, you'll realize that the Equalization Fund was actually put forward by the drafters of the Constitution so that by the end of the day, we bring the whole country to one level. Madam Speaker, the issues raised, especially on the Equalization Fund, by various speakers, is actually very important. And I want to note the issues raised by members from the ASAL, members from the less developed areas, members from the marginalized parts of the country. And by marginalized or less developed, it doesn't mean it is not talking about the sun, the heat, and many others. There are so many factors that we put into consideration. The inaccessibility of places, the level of development, the poverty index, and many others. So, Madam Speaker, the drafters of the Constitution in 2012, in 2010, realized that for us to be one nation, one people, we must bring all to almost an equitable level playing field, so that Kenyans in various parts of this country will feel that we are one nation, one people, one society, and therefore, this fund actually is trying to bring areas that are poorly developed in terms of infrastructure. In terms of, when I talk of infrastructure, I'm talking about road network, we are talking about water network to homes, schools, colleges, and various parts, even hospitals. A number of areas in this country, Madam Speaker, especially the northern part, are actually having a hospital up to almost 20 kilometers apart, some even more than that range. And while in other areas, hospitals and schools are in less than 3-4 kilometers away. So it will be good that this fund is enhanced. This fund is disbursed on time. This fund is well managed so that what the drafters or the intention of the drafters of the Constitution is realized earlier than scheduled. Because if you look at the schedule, this fund is supposed to take up to 20 years. As said by members, it is the second year, meaning that the last 8 years, the last 10 years, this fund has not been disbursed. It has not been utilized well. So the intentions cannot be realized. And in fact, it will even mean that there is need to extend the time frame beyond the scheduled 20-year period when the drafters felt that if this fund is utilized well, other parts of the country will come to par with the developed parts of the country. 2, the management of the fund. And I want to say that my constituency is actually one of the beneficiaries, but it is not the whole part of it. Areas where, because it is very hilly, it is not having good roads, the standards of living are quite low, and so many other things affect it. But I want to discuss this especially on administration of the fund. That as much as the money has been disbursed, it will be prudent that the county government, which is actually the administrator of the fund, should actually look into it to make sure that there is value for resources, to make sure that the funds are allocated for the roads, the funds are allocated for the hospitals, the funds are allocated for water. The people, the beneficiaries, are actually going to get those particular resources. So, Madam Speaker, I want to say that this fund is actually very important for the whole part of the world. If you look at areas where we have no bridges, where we have no road network, where we have no hospitals, where we have no dispensaries, this fund is going to be very, very important. And I want to say this. I heard the member for Samburu Lili talking about the level of development in her region. I want this house to look at it, that we look our country as one. That one part of the country which is less developed is part of our country. The people who are low in development are also our people. And if we have everyone up, then the whole nation will develop. I want to take the case, I think most of what other nations have done. If you look at the United States, for example, in the 1920s, 1930s, we had regions, very dry regions. Even the Tennessee Valley, for example, which was actually one of the least developed parts. And even the Nevada and many parts. China has done the same. Many parts of the world have done the same. This is not something that we have picked it from the blues. It is something that any national leader, any leader who wants to bring his country to the same table, so that when Turkana is doing well, when Mandera is doing well, then anyone else could also feel to be part and parcel of that particular part of the world. So in effect, I'm just calling that, let these funds be disbursed on time, let this fund be increased, not to be at the same level as it were, and then this fund, let it be administered in a very, let it be managed very efficiently to make sure that the benefits that were intended to achieve, even the construction of hospitals, the construction of roads, the having water in those particular areas, electricity, and many others, will be realized at a faster rate, and therefore we will come at the same level as Kenyans and as one people. I support Madam Chair. Thank you.
Honorable Ngeno.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Speaker, for allowing me also to ventilate into this issue of Equalization Fund. Madam Speaker, and like what my colleagues have said, Madam Speaker, the reason why the drafters of the Constitution looked into three areas where money was supposed to be divided, Madam Speaker. Because when you look at the Constitution states that money shall be divided among three entities. Entity one is the national government, entity two is the county governments, entity three is the Equalization Fund. Madam Speaker, the reason why the drafters of the Constitution looked at the Equalization Fund was because of so many reasons. And I think one of the reasons is, Madam Speaker, if you look at the concept of the colonial wars, if you look at the concept of even the colonialists invading other countries, it was because of fight for resources. When you look at tribal wars, wherever they are, whether from time immemorial to the current, it is because of fight for resources. When you look at even the political contests that we have, in every country, Madam Speaker, the bottom line is that everybody is fighting for resources. And that is the reason why we have all these contests. And I think the reason why the drafters of the Constitution felt that we should have an allocation called Equalization Fund was because they realized that from time immemorial, there are areas which has been marginalized, both by governments and by nature. Madam Speaker, when I speak about governments, I mean there has been successive governments in this country, from the colonial government to the pre-independence or after independence. We have had governments and successive governments. And when the drafters of the Constitution were looking at this equalization fund, they meant, and their major intention was that, look at the areas which has never had any favor by any government. And that was meant to be equalized with the rest of the country. Madam Speaker, there are also areas which have been marginalized by nature or by natural causes. Areas which do not or is not even able to do agriculture and any other agricultural activities or economic activities, Madam Speaker, that can help those areas. This is an area where the drafters of the Constitution intended to allocate this money. Madam Speaker, the Constitution Article 204 states that there shall be 1.5% of allocation to the equalization. Madam Speaker, it also talked about the marginalized areas, and it talked about the marginalized communities. That is on Section 6, I think Section 4, Section 5, where it is talking about the marginalized communities and marginalized counties. Madam Speaker, when the CRA started working on these particular marginalized counties, Madam Speaker, it picked 14. And the reason why they picked 14, Madam Speaker, was based on several issues, just like what my brother here said, poverty index, and so many other issues, Madam Speaker. The 14, Madam Speaker, it was supposed to be allocated money from 2010, immediately after the promulgation of the Constitution. Madam Speaker, my constituency was one of the beneficiaries because it was falling under another county. It's falling under another county, Madam Speaker. But we benefited 5 years after the promulgation of the Constitution. And after that, Madam Speaker, no any other money has been allocated. The only other time, Madam Speaker, when this money was allocated is, I think it is now. So we have had 2 allocations. And when you read, Madam Speaker, Section 6, Section 5 of Article 204, it states the unspent money. What is supposed to be done to the unspent money? It is supposed to be kept and utilized. But if you were to do a simple math, Madam Speaker, from 2010 up to 2024, which is 14 years, how much money is that? Who has been spending that money? Where is that money? We are 6 years to the sunset of this particular fund. Madam Speaker, and not even that, before the CRA introduced another model of allocating this money, because initially, Madam Speaker, the 14 counties which were benefiting only benefited once. By the time they introduced 34 counties, Madam Speaker, what happened to the money that was supposed to be spent on the 14 counties? Because the 14 counties came up to late 2020. These 14 counties, which are supposed to benefit from 2010, 2011, 2012, up to 2020, and have never benefited, what will happen to the money that was supposed to be sent to these particular counties? Madam Speaker, even when I look at the current allocation, Madam Speaker, done by CRA, it's alarming. It has never even assisted anybody because the 14 marginalized counties has never risen from where they were. In fact, just like what my colleague has said, the number of marginalized counties are increasing. They increased from 14 to 34. What does that tell you, Madam Speaker? It tells you the government is doing nothing to alleviate the poverty level of our people. So that by now, instead of 14, we now have 34 counties which are marginalized. Who is marginalizing these counties, Madam Speaker? So, me, myself, I support this amendment by the Senate, but I would wish the committee concerned to relook, and that is the budget committee, to relook into areas, into the monies which has not been spent from 2010 to the current, and ensure that the 14 counties which were allocated this money from 2010 to 2020 are given their money so that they can spend on the correct, on the right projects which they had stated or which are stated in the Constitution. Madam Speaker, I wish as a beneficiary of this particular allocation, Madam Speaker, to state also that inside the marginalized counties, inside even inside the Equalization Fund, Madam Speaker, which was meant to cure the marginalization, there is also a very serious marginalization inside the picked counties. Because, Madam Speaker, if you look even at how the disparities which were done, you go and start identifying using the sublocations or even wards, so that if this money was allocated one constituency, you will realize they are allocating maybe 2 or 3 wards. What will the rest of the wards say? It is causing a lot of turmoil. So, Madam Speaker, my contribution is that the committee concerned, which is the budget committee, should look into the monies or the balance which was not allocated to these marginalized counties, so that they can get their fair share. Secondly, Madam Speaker, the CRA should use a model that will purely identify the areas which were marginalized both by the governments and by nature, so that we can actually bring these people to the equal level. Otherwise, Madam Speaker, we'll be saying we are doing equalization, or we are allocating equalization funds and not doing what is supposed to be done. So, Madam Speaker, I wish to support and wish to ensure, or ask the committee that is concerned to ensure that they implore upon the CRA so that they can do proper allocation of these particular funds. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Boroza.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank you for this opportunity. And Madam Speaker, right from the onset, I'd like to lend my support to the Equalization and Appropriation Bill from the Senate. Madam Speaker, I stand on the strength of our Constitution, which was promulgated in 2010. That Constitution dictates that every Kenyan is equal to the other Kenyan. Madam Speaker, which means that every area in this country is as important as any other area. Madam Speaker, because of that, in the Constitution, you find very many affirmative action programs, either to bring people who are otherwise undermined to the point of level with every other Kenyan, or to bring areas that are underdeveloped to the point that they were nearly as equally as developed as all the other areas in Kenya. And Madam Speaker, that's where the Equalization Fund comes in, to bring up those areas which are underdeveloped in key elements that are necessary for human life, like education, infrastructure, including hospitals, including schools, including roads, so that we all feel like, indeed, we are all Kenyans. Madam Speaker, I served as a commissioner in the IIBRC Commission, also known as the Legale Commission. Madam Speaker, I went around the whole country. And Madam Speaker, I'd like to let you know that there are parts of this country that are so remote, parts of this country that do not have what we call roads. Madam Speaker, many of those children in those parts of the country have not even seen cars. Madam Speaker, Equalization Fund was meant to make these people who are in such parts of the country to actually feel like they belong to this country called Kenya. And Madam Speaker, for this reason, I support this bill, because this bill will bring those areas that are undermined or underdeveloped to the fore, so that they are also developed nearly as possible as the other parts of this country. Madam Speaker, it's a shame that we are almost getting to the 20 years time limit for this Equalization Fund. What will then happen when 20 years lapse and we've not benefited from this equalization bill, affirmative amendment, affirmative action opportunity? Just because money that's been appropriated has never been used towards this effort. Madam Speaker, I support this amendment bill from the Senate because what it does is it locks in the money that is meant for equalization fund such that even if one financial year passes, it will still be locked for that purpose that it was intended for. Because that is the only way to go, to ensure that those areas that are underdeveloped are actually, the money that's intended to bring them up is used for that purpose. Madam Speaker, as I stand here, because I believe in this equalization, I believe that the whole country is not equal. Madam Speaker, for that reason, I will never support this 1 man, 1 shilling, 1 vote, whatever it's called. Madam Speaker, because this country, there's so much discrepancy in the development of this country. And you need equalization fund, you need affirmative action to bring other Kenyans who are not benefiting like every other Kenyan to the fore so that they can also enjoy being Kenyans. Madam Speaker, I want to say again, categorically, I support this bill. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Majority Whip.
My point of order.
No, you can't raise a point of order. I'll first give member for Marsabit, the Deputy Whip.
How do you contradict your party leader?
Honorable Speaker,
Honorable Wako, you on the floor.
Thank you for allowing me to contribute to this Equalization Fund Appropriation number 2 bill. And from the onset, I want to confirm that I fully support this. Honorable Speaker, it is unfortunate that so many years down the line, we are still debating and no much progress has been recorded as a result of this. Honorable Speaker, we should be guided by the purpose of this Equalization Fund. Many honorable members have already said that this was to address the marginalized areas. When we talk of marginalized areas, many people do not understand the situation in those areas. These funds initially was to bring at par the 14 counties, namely Turkana, Mandera, Wajir, Marsabit, Samburu, West Pokot, Tana River, Narok, Kwale, Garissa, Kilifi, Taita Taveta, and Lamu. But unfortunately today as we stand, the number of the counties that need to come at par with others has grown, not because of clear justification, but just because others want to compete with these areas that have been marginalized since independence. The purpose of Equalization Fund is, number 1, to improve on roads, road network, water, electricity, and hospitals. Madam Speaker, I come from Marsabit, which is part of the 14 marginalized area, the initial 14 marginalized areas. And in that part of the world, it is just like 7 years ago that we saw tarmac 2 passing through our county. And to date, we do not have even connecting roads to our villages. We are still struggling. Water is a real problem even where I come from, and yet I live in town. Electricity, many people still live in the same problem that we used to live in, where we do not have electricity connectivity to the villages. These are basic needs. And any responsible government has to work hard to make sure that every part of the country is at the same level, progressing and developing at the same rate. Unfortunately, for over 50 years, most of these counties have been marginalized. And these funds have been sitting somewhere without supporting any county, any individual. And that is why today we are debating on the same. But the unfortunate bit, the counties that needed to benefit from this has grown from 14 to 34. What does this mean? It means that the funds that was to support and help the real marginalized areas is now scattered and distributed among many counties such that it will not make any positive impact on the counties that have suffered for the last many years since independence. We need our education system to be improved, infrastructure, we need water, roads, our hospitals. Up to today, in some of our counties, people travel for over 300 kilometers. And imagine of an expectant mother who is in labor on a rough road, traveling for 300 kilometers. Most of them have lost their lives as they struggle on the roads. Majority of them have also delivered on the road. Is that what we want to continue hearing in the 21st century? No. And that is why, yes, many counties still need this money, but we should go back to the original 14 counties so that the 14 counties can grow and come to par with other counties. Honorable Speaker, as we talk of this, again, any fund that goes to the counties, most of the time are mismanaged. It is unfortunate because we fight for more resources to go to the counties. But unfortunately, at the county level, corruption, again, is practiced at a very high level. And so the monies that are meant to bring development and growth goes into people's pocket. In fact, most of the time, it does not even benefit the counties, but it gets out of the counties because those individuals in the counties invest out of their own counties. And that is why we should demand for proper usage and accountability of any funds that will be released under Equalization Fund. Again, when it comes to implementation of this, the usual practice of tender and people given contracts to do any particular development. Honorable Speaker, the experience is these tenders are given to close friends or relatives or even people from outside those counties. And that is why, as members of parliament, we should make sure that these tenders get into the hands of individuals working and living in those counties so that that money can be generated and can benefit the local business people. A lot of local business people have lost their businesses because they have not been supported, and even if they do businesses, they have not been able to generate good income because of poor economy. And that is why we need to enhance those people who are already doing businesses at the local level and make sure that the money, that the profit that they get will just circulate and assist the people within their counties. Again, Honorable Speaker, the 22.7 billion arrears, the Treasury should strategize or come up with a plan of releasing these monies, because if we do it in many years, it will not have any positive impact. It is like a drop on an ocean. Let Treasury make sure that these monies are released as soon as possible, and also provide proper guidance so that any project, anything that will be done by this money will have positive impact on the growth of our people and also on the growth of the different counties. Honorable Speaker, I have already mentioned about the usage. There is a lot of wastage when it comes to usage of money from the national government to the counties. It is upon us and upon our people, the responsible people holding different offices, so that we be good stewards, and every coin that is meant for anybody or any progress, be it water, be it roads, be it hospital, should be used in those manners, so that we elevate the lives of our people, we improve their lives, and once we get proper health facilities, you can imagine the hospital bills that we keep incurring. Today, all politicians, over the weekend, we normally, get a lot of requests from people and do a lot of fundraising. Once we do this and invest in hospitals, health centers, then we will overcome that. Proper roads, the many accidents we have, and especially after the destruction that has been made by the rains, we can be able to reduce the suffering of the people on the ground. Honorable Speaker, I support and I believe that Kenyans will make good use of the money and also plan well, so that the counties can really benefit and their lives can be transformed. Thank you, and I support.
Majority Whip. Majority Leader.
Honorable Speaker, thank you very much. Honorable Speaker, I want to say this. I am one of the proponents of this fund, because this fund is one of the very important funds in the Constitution. The Constitution is very clear. It talks about funds should be given counties, national government, and third, this fund that we are talking about. Those three funds. But what has happened over the time, the other two funds have been very important. But this other fund, the Equalization Fund, has been neglected. But it is a constitutional provision. This House has a committee called Constitutional Implementation Committee, whose role is to ensure that the Constitution is implemented in the spirit and in the letter. But for the many years I've been in this House, that committee has never spoken about the Equalization Fund. Neither has it brought a motion here, neither has it interjected during budget to say that it is important that the Equalization Fund must be given as money is given to the counties, so is the Equalization Fund given to those counties that have been earmarked for equalization. That is the tragedy of the committee we have here, and that is the tragedy of Kenya. That at the onset of the Constitution, it was agreed by all Kenyans who voted in the referendum, including the people from my constituents, who woke up very early in the morning, going to vote for the Constitution, knowing that inside that Constitution, there is something called Equalization Fund that would take care of them, because they have been, for many years, been marginalized, for many years they have been underserved, for many years no meaningful development has taken place there, because in 1963-65 there, a sessional paper was allowed in this country to deliberately and systematically marginalize certain communities, including the communities at the coast. Today, Honorable Speaker, we are at that crossroad. That crossroad that isn't this Equalization Fund as important as the money that is sent to the counties, as the money that is sent into the national. When the Honorable Ndindi Nyoro here does the budget, he will tell us about the money that will go to the counties. He will tell us about the trillions that will go to the national government. But he lays least emphasis on the Equalization Fund. And when that happens, in this House, when CDF does not come, we all in solidarity make noise that CDF exchequer must be released. When counties do not receive their money, we make noise. The Council of Governors is there and they make noise about money has not been released. But what is the organ? Honorable Speaker, this is the question. What is the organ that is mandated to safeguard and ensure that this Equalization Fund is put in place? What is the organ? There was a time when I wasted my shoes every day walking to the PS for Treasury. who was said to, up till today, he's supposed to be the person in charge of distributing that PS Treasury. But PS Treasury is the culprit even when it comes to CDF, when it comes to county government money, it comes to exchequer releases. So what will he do? If he's under pressure from county government, he will release the money. When he is under pressure from national government, the National Assembly will release the money to NGCDF. But who puts pressure on the Equalization Fund? And that is the structure that is missing in the implementation of the Equalization Fund. Because when this is a fund, I remember Kamket tried to propose some changes. And even we looked at that act and we said, let's form a board. A board like the NGCDF board. A board like the Council of Governors, who will ensure that Equalization Fund is disbursed at the same time when NGCDF is disbursed. But the politics that has been there, Honorable Speaker, and this is why I will want to challenge the lawyers in this House, including the Honorable Emilio Odhiambo. We need to amend that law. That we must amend. So that at the end of the day, Honorable Speaker, the people that have been marginalized systematically in this country get a fair share of what the Constitution intended them to have. Get a fair share. But as it is today, I heard the Honorable Mary Emase say that we have a balance of 62 billion. 62 billion. That has not been paid systematically over the years. But if it is a fund, you cannot have that. If it is called a fund in the Constitution, it means if it is allocated 100 billion a year, that 100 billion must be paid within that year. And we should not have a balance. And if there is a balance, it should be accumulated and given to that account. That's what it is. And if it is a fund, it must have an account into which it must be put because it is a fund. Where is the account for the Equalization Fund? Where is it domiciled? Where is it? We want to see how much money is in there. Otherwise, now we should be having a lot of money because we have done 8 years. And 8 years out of the 20 years that the Constitution provides, we have done 8 years. And each year, money is set in the budget for Equalization Fund. So that money systematically needs to be accounted for. Where is it? Where is that 62 billion? Which account? And why is it that Treasury never puts that money there? I have projects that were started in 2017 in my constituency when these things started. And they have never been completed. And when you ask ministry, they say, you see, Treasury has not released. Until now, we are saying that now county governments have come, and county governments now are saying they must implement, after the court ruling, county governments are saying they must also implement equalization funds. There are certain functions that are for the national government. I don't begrudge that. But the problem I have is I want to see systematically that there is an account in the county government for equalization fund, which we can audit as members from those areas, those counties. But we don't have that opportunity to do that. So where does the equalization money go? It comes in as part of the grants that come from national government, so the governor can use it on functions even which are not listed. You know, the equalization fund has only 4 functions. Only 4 functions in the Constitution. Roads, health, water, and it's not electricity, it's something else. There are 4. Yeah? Health. Only 4. There are 4 functions. But when a governor gets the money, what will stop a governor from using the money to buy a red carpet for his functions when he receives it as bulk money? What will stop the governor from using this same money to do things that are not within the Constitution? How do we audit equalization fund? Where is the law? What has the Committee on Implementation of Constitution done to ensure that this money is properly accounted for? My people, Kilifi is one of the areas that was identified as marginalized. And a lot of the counties in the coast and those in the north. This nation, when we went to vote for the Constitution, we knew. And I went to vote for the Constitution knowing that I have money that will fast track my county to be at the same level as Kiambu, as Kakamega, as others. But that dream is buried in the soil, dead, that dream of my people. Why? Because we have, and previous government, have systematically ensured that there is no proper law to put into account the use of equalization. I think that has been the trick, that as long as we don't have a law, we can run away from disbursing equalization fund. But the law, Honorable Speaker, you know, you're a lawyer, you know. When something is identified as a fund, in the just like you have consolidated fund, just like we have the CRF, you know, it's a fund. You can't run away from putting money there. But what we will do, we will put money in another place and leave equalization. Because there is a belief, the people from the coast, the people from the north, the people from those other areas that are not as important as the others. We are continuing the 1963 sessional paper. We are continuing the same thing. But we have a constitution we must obey. Just like you can obey giving money to the counties, we must obey giving the equalization fund. That is the constitution of this republic. So when we stand to uphold that constitution in this parliament and any other office, and we say we are swearing by this constitution, why are we failing to implement it for the people that have been systematically marginalized in this country? Why? Because they are not important? I think it is time that those of us who have been marginalized to stand up and say no. If money for counties is released, money for equalization must be released. Money for national government is released for NGCDF, money for equalization. We
and Baya, why are you looking at me like you want more minutes? The Honorable Millie Grace Akoto Diambo Mabona, the MP for Subo North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Speaker, I wish to support this bill. And in supporting this bill, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I've worked in many years on the issue of equality and the issue of equity, where equality is about making sure that everybody is at par. Equity is about bringing those who are behind to the same level as the ones who are ahead. Mr. Speaker, the Equality Fund seeks to realize equity. And I want to say very proudly that I played a big role in the provision of this also in the Constitution, amongst other people. And Mr. Speaker, even though I agreed with some of my colleagues, I want to disagree in some respects, and especially in relation to the member from Samburu. I know that when we had the first policy, it had 14 counties. And I know that, there's a member who was contributing and kept referring to 14 counties. It's no longer 14 counties with good reason. There are no 14 counties in the Constitution. And the first policy tried to identify 14 counties based on history of what we have considered as marginalized in this country. And Mr. Speaker, after the implementation of those 14 counties, one of the things that was coming out clearly is that there are definitely pockets of marginalization in this country. I'll give you an example of my own constituency. And I'm glad that Mfangano Island and Gembe wards in my constituency, Mfangano is actually in our sub-county, have been included. And I want to say that one of the reasons that Mfangano Island has been included is one, for you to reach Mfangano Island, you can only go by water. There is no road. There is no public transport by the government for you to go there. So if you have no money, you have no way of getting there. Let's start from there. Secondly, the ring road on Mfangano Island, for the very first time, has been done. And the president himself went there to launch the ring road. Why was he launching it? Not because he was doing a tarmac, but because they are doing a maram road. Because in Mfangano Island, there is no maram road. So if you want to tell me let us be equal and look at counties in general, when will we ever reach Mfangano Island where there is no maram? If I go to in Mfangano Island, sometimes I take my photos in my constituency, And I hear people who are ignorant, when they see me in a motorbike or walking, they say you are doing PR. In Fangano Island, I will use I'll use a boat to reach there. I will use a four-wheeler up to a point. I will use a motorbike up to a point. And then the areas I just have to walk. Even a motorbike can't reach. When we say that we are only going to areas, counties that are generally marginalized, when will we ever reach Mfangano Island? You can say the same thing in relation to parts of Gembe that has also been included. There are areas that have no schools, no roads, and they are perennially cut off. In fact, recently when we had the rains, a place in my constituency called Sikri is always cut off. And people have to go by boat. Students' schools stop in order for the rains to stop. And if you are to wait for that, so that the places that are generally marginalized as counties to be reached, then when will we get there? We are creating new areas of marginalization. We must carry everybody together. I know that there are areas that are expert at pushing the agenda and by screaming marginalization, which is okay because they are marginalized. Our areas, we don't scream marginalization. We tend to scream democracy. But I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, we will be screaming democracy and marginalization. And if you want to know that there are areas, especially Luo Nyanza, I'm sorry to use the word Luo Nyanza, that have been marginalized because of our political leanings over years. Opposition areas never get money. In fact, I am so happy that we get CDF. The first time I saw a school, a wonderful school as I was passing in your constituency actually, and when I was passing and I saw a nice school and I was like, before I became an MP, and I said, wow, that's a nice school. Because it was a very transformative school. And I was told that school is built by CDF. And I was so proud to discover that it's my grandfather that actually donated that land. But if it weren't for CDF, a lot of schools in our areas would still be mud-walled because of our politics, which is opposition. And Mr. Speaker, it is unfortunate that even if you look at even the US, that they are going through elections now. There are people who are in government and people who are in opposition. That's the essence of democracy. Mr. Speaker, having said that, I actually want to say that we are missing the point. We are referring to the Constitution without even making reference to what that Constitution says in relation to marginalization. And Mr. Speaker, I want to say that if you look at the interpretation clause of the Constitution, it says marginalization includes traditional community that out of a need or a desire to preserve its unique culture and identity from assimilation has remained outside the integrated social, economic life of Kenya as a whole. That would include the Suba people or an indigenous community that has retained and maintained a traditional lifestyle and livelihood based on hunter or gatherer economy. That would include the fishing community or pastoral persons or communities, whether they are a nomadic or settled community, that because of its relative geographic isolation has experienced only marginal participation in the integrated social and economic life of Kenya as a whole. So, Mr. Speaker, it actually talks to very many areas of the country. It doesn't only talk to northern Kenya, which I agree is marginalized, but so is my constituency. And I also want to say that if you look at the same interpretation section, it says marginalized group is defined as a group of people who, because of laws or practices before, on, or after the effective date, were or are disadvantaged by discrimination on one or more of the following grounds in Article 27(4). And those grounds include race, sex, pregnancy, marital status, health, ethnic or social origin, color, age, disability, religion, conscience, amongst other things. Mr. Speaker, if you look at the issue of marginalization, it is much bigger than what we are trying to limit it here. I want to agree that there are areas that have been marginalized, including northern Kenya, including coastal areas in Kenya, including Suba areas. And that's why you see both Suba North and South are included. That's why Ndiwa is included, because those are areas that have been marginalized. In fact, other parts of Nyanza and Homa Bay would be marginalized, save that God was gracious, and they have fine weather, and so they do well economically. Other areas may not have that, but the weather, as I had one member talking to, is not included in the definition of marginalization. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that I want to encourage and agree with my committee, the Budget Committee, that the arrears should be released so that we see the effective use of this fund. And I also want to say that when you give this money like Panadol to a person with malaria, you are not going to cure it. You need to give this medicine like you are giving serious medicine, maybe chloroquine. I don't know what the current medicine is, because I don't get malaria anymore. But if the way you can give chloroquine to a person who has malaria, not Panadol. And because of that, we need to actually provide more money. In my constituency, for instance, it's only 19 million. What will 19 million do to Mfangano Island together with the Gembe? It's little. We are appreciating of it because we are included. But I want to say that even when that third policy comes, we must include those areas or pockets of marginalization, and we must remain true to the constitutional definition of marginalization. We are not marginalized because we speak loud. We are marginalized as a matter of fact. And I want to also agree with the members that have said that we must also bring into account what people are also getting. This is not the only money people are getting. We are getting CDF, we are getting this money, and we are getting allocation in ministries. And I sit in budget, and I can tell you that there are areas that are getting marginalization. They are getting money through public participation. They are getting money through direct allocation from ministries. It's just that my time is up. But there's a lot to be checked when we are dealing with marginalization. I support.
The Honorable Mili, the Honorable Joshua Kimilu, MP for Kaiti.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this opportunity to contribute on this important motion about equalization funds. Mr. Speaker, I want to say these funds are very important to our areas. Those are marginalized. Although, Mr. Speaker, as a support, I want to say a lot has to be done, Mr. Speaker, because I think there are also areas which are marginalized and they are not benefiting from these funds. Mr. Speaker, when you go to some counties, like early this year, I traveled to Wajir County, and Mr. Speaker, I was shocked to see a county without electricity network, Mr. Speaker. And these are the areas we need to fight for them to benefit from these funds. Because, Mr. Speaker, if we are Kenyans, as Kenyans, we need to mind of those areas which are marginalized, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these are the funds which need to be given to these counties to do like, especially if you talk of health centers. In this century, Mr. Speaker, there are some areas whereby you can travel for more than 20 kilometers to look for a health center. Despite count money, Mr. Speaker, these are the areas which need to benefit by this equalization fund, Mr. Speaker. Because health centers are key, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency, I have hilly places, Mr. Speaker. And going from one health center to another one, Mr. Speaker, sometimes it's a challenge because of the transport. Mr. Speaker, from my constituency to get a Maram, Mr. Speaker, you need to travel more than 50 kilometers, Mr. Speaker, to make those roads. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this money can help in making roads in our counties and also improving the transport sector in our area, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think this money should be increased and also released at the right time, Mr. Speaker, because it's very important to help our people who are languishing in poverty, because there are some counties which are living in very low status, Mr. Speaker. And with this money, it can help in health centers, roads, water, like some areas, Mr. Speaker, from where the county I come from, Mr. Speaker, there are some areas whereby to get water, you have to travel more than 10 kilometers to access water, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with this money, I think we can do boreholes, water pumps, which can also help and try to alleviate poverty from our areas, Mr. Speaker. This money, Mr. Speaker, can also help in mobilization of community and capacity building, Mr. Speaker. Because if you do capacity building in an area, in fact, you help that community to alleviate in poverty, Mr. Speaker, which can assist and also help to improve education. Mr. Speaker, these equalization funds also, although we have CDF, Mr. Speaker, and that's why sometimes I speak in this house and say the CDF we have is not even enough to improve education in our constituency, Mr. Speaker. Because there are some areas where there are no schools, there are no infrastructure, Mr. Speaker, and with assistance, with the little money we get from CDF, together with these equalization funds, Mr. Speaker, I think we can benefit a child of this country, Mr. Speaker. So I think, Mr. Speaker, I want to support this motion, and I want to say that as Kenyans, we need to stand with this fund and try when it comes to accountability, Mr. Speaker. Because the counties are the custodian of this money, Mr. Speaker, we need also to look on checks and balances should be done to those counties to make sure that this money is well spent and goes to the right people, Mr. Speaker. Thank you. I support.
The Honorable Francis Igei, MP for Sotik.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank you for giving the opportunity to also talk on this topical issue and support this bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it takes a person who has worked in this place, who has visited these areas, to understand the problems these people are facing. And I know the MPs from these areas, and those of us like myself, Mr. Speaker, who has worked in these areas for many years.
The Honorable Francis Igei, until the Speaker stops you.
Mr. Speaker, I want to say, Mr. Speaker, I worked in Garissa for 5 years, and I understand what the problems people in this area are facing. Mr. Speaker, I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, if you go to a place like Amuma, go to a place like Almagala in Garissa, you understand this problem. Mr. Speaker, I want to say two things. Number one, I want to thank the framers of this constitution, which is very, very important and which is leading in Africa, that they thought very clearly, with a lot of wisdom, that we must bring up people who are underdeveloped in this country to come to par with other parts of the country. Mr. Speaker, I think we need to address the issue of legal framework. Mr. Speaker, this fund is like a fund free for all, Mr. Speaker, because there is no legal framework to show the use of these funds. And I want to recommend, Mr. Speaker, that we ring fence this fund so that when it is dispersed to the counties, it is known that it's going to a particular area, education, infrastructure, roads, health, so that we are specific about where this money is going to. Mr. Speaker, we need also to address the issue of corruption. We know, Mr. Speaker, and we need to know how much money has gone there before we ask for more. Of course, we need to ask for more money. But how has the money which was dispersed a while ago was spent in these counties? So, Mr. Speaker, I want us to address the issue of wastage so that our people can be able to get the money. Wastage is a major problem, and we need to address that one. Mr. Speaker, we need to ask ourselves, what is the problem with disbursement? What Parliament has appropriated this mandate for these counties? What happened to Treasury? And how can we address this issue of non-disbursement? So that, Mr. Speaker, we are able to know what is the problem. This House, Mr. Speaker, is the final authority to appropriate money and disperse this money. But where is the problem? Bureaucracy, Mr. Speaker, must be addressed. So that the money which this House has appropriated is released without any delay, so that these people can be able to address this thing. Again, Mr. Speaker, we need to address ourselves and say, okay, we have had problems with disbursement, inadequate funds. So how do we address this issue of the huge disparities in these counties? Mr. Speaker, this country belongs to all of us, and this country must be developed at equal measure, so that our people can be at par in terms of development. Mr. Speaker, I want to say I support this motion, and I would like to thank the Committee of Budget and Appropriation for the good work well done, and we need to see this money going to the people of this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honorable Dr. Eva Kinyobara, MP for Kabondo Kasuku.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for giving me the opportunity.